Hey guys, welcome back to the next part of our series. Today we're going to talk about the post-production of our scene. Now, as you can see, the rendering's still going, but at 10%, I'm pretty happy with the results that we got so far. Oh my god. I pressed spacebar again, my bad. So it's going to render again. I'm just going to wait for this to finish, but that's what I wanted to say. I find that at 10% is just like good enough. So we already know how to deal with that. We can go to adaptive sampling, and if I know that 10% is good enough, then maybe lowering the samples to something like 6 should be more than enough. It's definitely going to be, or should be, a little bit faster, and as long as the denoiser does its job and cleans things nicely, then it's fine. Usually for single images, like if you're just going to do a couple of renders but they're not going to be moving, then as long as you have a clean render, that's all you want. When you add in motion, when things are going to be moving from one point to another, that's when you really need to make sure that your samples and your cleanliness, the denoiser and everything is working as nice as possible, because the blurriness that you get from the denoiser will be visible on the animation. So you really want to crank your samples up on that specific point. But yeah, as you can see, like right now, this is more than enough. I know that the denoiser is going to be able to solve all of these little like points very easily, and the image is looking quite clean. So let me pause this real quick for this to finish, and then when it finishes, we're actually going to save this image with a different format to talk about a couple of things before we jump into the post-production in Photoshop. So give me just 1 second. There we go. So the thing we're going to do differently is we're actually going to be saving this as a multi-layer EXR, which is just an EXR file. If we had layers, we would be saving all of the layers, but we don't, so it's just going to be a spooky hallway. And if we go into Photoshop real quick and we open the image, something interesting is going to happen. What's going to change here is the fact that now we're going to set this as alpha channel, very important. And this is what we get, and it won't look the way it looks in Maya, and this is very important. When you export as EXRs, we're exporting as a raw file. Remember when we talked about the raw files and the sRGB things? Well, that's exactly what we're doing here. So when we see this in Maya, this is the sRGB. This right now is the raw file, but the cool thing about the raw file is that we actually have a little bit more room to work with several of the things that we have here. So what do I mean by this? Well, what I can do, for instance, is we can add some adjustment layers, and we can add the exposure adjustment layer. And if we start changing the gamma, now we're going to be able to like lighten up a little bit of the scene without destroying or overexposing things. So as you can see, we have way more room to play around. We can also play around with the exposure, and it takes quite a bit of time until we start like breaking things up. And even when we break things up, like when we really overexpose things, it's not really breaking them. As you can see, it's not like creating super ugly colors or anything. It's just like making the lights quite intense. So we can play around with these elements right here. I wouldn't recommend playing around with the offset as much. And once we're happy, once you're like, okay, you know what, I've done a little bit of tweaking, especially I kind of want to recover a little bit of the ground here. I don't want things to be extremely dark. Now we can convert this image into an 8-bit image and work with it or tweak it in a more traditional way. The way you're going to do this is you're going to go image, you're going to say adjustments, or sorry, mode, and we're going to bring this back to 16 bits. And we're going to say merge. What's going to happen? This is going to happen. At first, it's going to try to do this thing. We don't want to do this. We're going to say exposure and gamma, very important. And if you leave it like this, it should remain exactly as what you had before. Gamma is set to 1, exposure is set to 0. We just hit OK, and there we go. This is now a 16-bit image, and all of the filters that we have right here are going to work a little bit better. So let's bring back some of those cool colors that we had, because right now we're losing some of them. And I'm going to start by doing this with a color balance. So we're going to go to our highlights, and we're going to bring some of that like nice golden elements. We're going to go to shadows, and let's go really cool on the shadows. There we go. Again, at any point we can even change the blending mode of these things and create some interesting effects. For instance, overlay really crunches the colors and makes things look way too intense. But we can lower this, as with anything here inside of Photoshop, to like a 15%, for instance, and we'll get a very interesting look. Now, another thing we could do is, before we add any sort of effects, we could play around with the color lookup tables you guys remember from the last chapter. And we can load some of the lookup tables that we have available for us on the data folder. For instance, I don't know, like this chemical one. That's interesting. That looks quite nice, actually. It gives this very, like, again, like, interesting cinematic look without really like breaking a lot of the things that we're going for. So I like this thing right here. I might bring the intensity a little bit down to something like a 70%, and now we can even, like, on top of these things, use this color balance to punch things like a little bit higher in certain directions. Let's go for a curves. I really like using curves. Let's see if we can, like, I think I want to go to the reds and bring the reds down a little bit on the shadows, and then let's go to the blues and go for this sort of very nice, interesting yellowish effect. I do think we could benefit from a little bit of exposure, so just a tad bit here. Something that's also very important, and I strongly recommend you do this, make sure to try the images in multiple monitors or multiple screens, because sometimes the screens will look a little bit different. So for instance, if I were to grab this one and bring it to my other monitor real quick, it's really bright, and this one's a lot more contrasty. So sometimes you're going to be like grading stuff and making sure it looks very nice on your computer, and once you bring it somewhere else, it looks a little bit different. Just keep that in mind. Let's add a vignette. We lost the vignette, or we lost a little bit of the vignette, so let's add it back. There we go. And again, we can play around with the vignette, maybe instead to overlay, so we don't lose all of the effects. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. One thing that I definitely want to add is film grain. I think like some scratches on this one will be quite nice, so I'm gonna say film grain texture again. And we can look for something, you know, like this sort of like camcorders stuff that you find, like this thing right here. This is great. Let's copy this image, or this one looks a little bit better actually. You want to try and find the best possible like quality. Like this one's a little bit small, so it's probably gonna pixelate a little bit. But when we do the overlay or the screen, I think we're gonna do screen, and we're definitely gonna bring this down. It should be very, very subtle, very subtle. Because one of the bad things about these layers is that they tend to flatten your image, because it's just like having a screen on top of everything. So they do tend to flatten the images quite a bit. So just be careful there. You don't wanna kill all of these very cool things that we've created. Another thing that I've seen some people do for their renders is looking for textures, for instance, like grunge textures, and adding a little bit of this effects like in different parts. And especially if they have color, like this one right here. If you have like, or this things right here, like this is the stuff that you want. It does add some very, very interesting effects. Even if it has like the watermark, that's fine, because it will add texture to the whole thing. Especially if like in this case, we don't have everything like super textured. This could potentially add some interesting effects to the whole thing. Again, you definitely want to go soft on these things. Like you don't want to overdo it, because they will, or it will flatten your image. Okay, so as you can see, it looks quite nice, but it is flattening the image. One thing I suggest here is using mask, this little button down here, and you can mask out certain areas. So for instance, I really like the effect that we're giving the pillars, but maybe we don't want that on the back walls, right? Or on other parts of the picture. So we can just like soften it up a little bit in certain areas. And yes, we do have it. It's still there, but it's not as obvious. It's not really like destroying the whole composition or making it look super intense. This is where we would definitely add like decals if you want to. Like usually you would have this in textures or in the models, but if you don't have time to do that and you're gonna do this in post-production, that's fine. As long as it holds as a single image, it's perfectly fine. I'm gonna add my letterbox thingy that I love adding, because again, it gives this very nice cinematic look. It kind of like cleans up the image a little bit as well. I think it really helps. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm not sure if I want to add anything else, to be honest. Particles, like light particles, sometimes work. And again, that's the kind of stuff that it's easier to add in post-production. So for instance, let's go for some like soft light particles. This one looks cool. Let's copy this image. Go there. Since it's black, we could just hit screen, and then with a soft round brush, we're gonna like fade them out a little bit. You can blur them out as well. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, something like that. Of course, we can lower the opacity as well. So those are the kind of details you don't see this because it's not super obvious, but every single image that you see on the internet is probably going to have a little bit of post-production done to it. Even if it's just like a basic contrast or saturations and stuff like that, it's going to have something, and that something, it's what's going to make things look very, very cool. So like now that I mentioned saturation, how would this look as a black and white image? Quite nice. Maybe a little bit less saturated, works fine as well. There we go. Oh yeah, there's one more thing I want to show you. Before this, we're actually going to have to combine all of the images. So this is one very cool trick. They use this a lot in sci-fi movies and in scary movies like this. It's called chromatic aberration. So in old cameras, or defective cameras, there's this effect, especially towards the border of the image, that's called chromatic aberration. So usually in a perfect lens, all of the colors should deflect and move in the same way. But sometimes, especially when cameras again are a little bit faulty, what's going to happen is that the red, green, and blue channels of light are going to be split, and towards the edge of the image, you're going to see this sort of like well, it's called chromatic aberration, when things don't perfectly line up, and it really adds this very like uncanny, like a valley feeling to it. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go all the way down to the image. I'm gonna grab everything here, and I'm gonna hit, say, Control Shift E, or sorry, let me Control, see that? Control Shift Alt E. That's the shortcut. Control Shift Alt E. It's 4 keys, and that's gonna combine everything into a single image. Then I'm gonna duplicate that image. I'm gonna grab this image, and I'm gonna go to the channels. I'm gonna grab the red channel, and I'm gonna move it with my arrow keys. I'm gonna marquee select the whole image, and I'm gonna move this channel two taps to the right. So 1, 2, and then I'm gonna grab the blue channel. I'm gonna do the same to the other side. 1, 2. So now what I've done is I've pretty much shifted the colors slightly. Okay, so each channel is slightly in a slightly different channel, or should be. Did they not move? Let me try that again. That's really weird. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So 1, 2 pixels to the right on the red channel, and 1, 2 pixels to the left on the blue channel. As you can see, that's a little bit too much. Let me go back 1 pixel. So it's just gonna be 1 pixel to the right, 1 pixel to the left. But as you can see, we get this very cool effect. Compare this to the other image. Like this is a clean image, and this is the chromatic aberration image, and we get that interesting rainbow effect. And it might not look like much. Like people won't really notice, but it's gonna be there. It's gonna be there on your image, and it's definitely gonna give a different like feel to the whole thing, as you can see right there. Now, usually it gets a little bit like more intense towards the edge. So I've seen some people go to the edges and extend it even more. I don't think that's really necessary, but if you want to give it a try, feel free to do it. But yeah, that's the chromatic aberration effect. And again, that's one of those like a real life artifacts that happen on cameras and that can really help you get a very nice image. So I'm just going to save this image real quick. Let's call this a spooky hallway. And we're going to save this as a JPEG, of course, to be able to publish it online. Unfortunately, the JPEGs do suffer a little bit of compression. But yeah, there you go. After about an hour, I would say, of work, we got this very cool interior image. Now, I want to do one more render, or actually a couple more renders from this scene, and let's see how they look from different angles. I want to show you a very nice camera trick that we can do to create a cool little effect, and then we'll jump onto another interior scene, and where we'll explore a little bit more of a friendly light, a little bit more whimsical, more magical. So, yep, hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next one. Bye-bye.